And hello, everyone. I'm Bill Ritter of WABC TV, Channel 7 Eyewitness News, and this is another edition of the Countdown, election edition for the 2020 race for the White House. Tonight, the New Hampshire Democratic primary, and there are some big developments as the polls begin to close in New Hampshire. Senator Bernie Sanders is up. Former Vice President Joe Biden is down. Former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg is up. Way up. Leading our discussion tonight here in New York, political consultant Hank Scheinkoff, and in Manchester, New Hampshire, Eyewitness News political reporter Dave Evans. And gentlemen, before I get to you, let's talk about some of the latest polls because they are earth-shattering. In a new Monmouth University national poll, Senator Sanders leads the field with 26% of the vote among Democrats and Democratic-leaning registered voters. This is national. Biden is down to 16%. Buttigieg and Warren tied with 13%. And Bloomberg is on this board with 11%. He hasn't run in one race yet. But look how things change when you look at hypothetical matchups with President Trump. Michael Bloomberg has the widest margin of them all, topping Mr. Trump 51 to 42%. Sanders and Biden close behind. Wow is the biggest word I can think of. After a strong showing in Iowa, Bernie Sanders expecting a big win tonight in New Hampshire.
Our people have knocked on hundreds of thousands of doors in the snow and in the rain and the cold. And I think that's why we have a chance to do really, really well here.
So, what are his chances? Let's start, first of all, with political reporter Dave Evans. In New Hampshire right now, he's in Manchester. David, what's the mood there in New Hampshire right now?
Right now we are at Southern New Hampshire University at the Fieldhouse, and this is Bernie Sanders' headquarters for this evening. They've allowed the media in. There is a lot of media here for tonight's expected victory party. The latest polling here in New Hampshire shows him with a fairly significant lead, and right behind him is Pete Buttigieg. So this is basically a two-man race here in New Hampshire right now. We think probably Amy Klobuchar will come in third place. This state is really bad news for Joe Biden. He has left the state, gone ahead to South Carolina to start campaigning there. He has said it is a much more diverse state with a much larger black population than New Hampshire, certainly, and he hopes to revive his campaign. We said earlier in some of the newscasts tonight that it's really not so important exactly who wins in New Hampshire. It is important, though, in who loses and how badly they lose. I think a lot of people tonight are going to be looking at the Biden campaign to see if he can hold on the next 2.5 weeks until South Carolina. Also, Elizabeth Warren, she is hurting right now. So I think right now the focus is certainly on Sanders, Buttigieg, and then probably Klobuchar in third place.
Dave, I'm not sure you had a chance to see World News Tonight and the Open, but our friend Hank Scheinkoff did as we waited for this to begin, and you had a very interesting observation, Hank.
Well, the story's being already set up. It's Bloomberg versus Trump, and Trump is in that story talking about how he's been on the phones really talking to voters in New Hampshire. It's a setup, and the great saga will be the billionaires, the somewhat billionaire and the real billionaire together banging each other's brains in.
We're going to spend some time on Bloomberg, but I want to talk about Dave's observation about Joe Biden leaving the state of New Hampshire before the votes, were even started to be counted. Listen, you've run a lot of campaigns. What does that say to you about your candidate?
Dave's observation is very important. Why we know that when you leave, you're in trouble. There's no reason to stay there. Biden is trying to keep that ship afloat, not very well. He's running out of money, and he ran out of voters in New Hampshire. He's going to South Carolina to try to make himself the black candidate. That's his only way to win this thing.
That vote in South Carolina, the primary is not for 2 weeks until 2 weeks from Saturday. So he's got almost 3 weeks. Where you put New Hampshire behind, where he's going to come in maybe fourth place.
Bad strategy follows you when you go forward unless you've got a way to break out of it. Bad strategy here is I'm the guy. Bad strategy is count on me. Good strategy is get as much as you can and run a real campaign.
Dave, I want you to react to what Hank's about to say because I'm going to ask you, Hank, is it likely we're going to see some candidates drop out after tonight?
You're going to see, I would think that Senator Warren has got real trouble here. And Buttigieg will go on because he can raise the money. What happens to Amy Klobuchar? Well, her star rises. She'll get some money in. But Bernie Sanders is the one to watch because you look at that split and how people are leaning. He's really in an extraordinary position. He's getting young people and he's getting people leaning on the left. tells you what Mike Bloomberg's lane is very clearly.
Yeah, exactly. And David, before I get your reaction to that, Andrew Yang today said, I think I might run in 2024 again because I like this. I'd be better prepared. So that was sort of a setup for perhaps his departure as well.
Yeah, I don't think he is much of a force here in New Hampshire or in the national polls. I wanted to just for a second go back to the Joe Biden thing, because yesterday and today we interviewed so many voters here in New Hampshire, because to be honest, I didn't know if we were going to actually see the candidates at exactly the times that they said they were going to. So it was kind of frenetic. So while we were waiting for the candidates, I interviewed a lot of voters. And the thing about Joe Biden, with almost all of the voters that we talk with, it was almost pained when I would ask them about Joe Biden. They would have this look on their face of, I like Joe Biden, he's an American hero, he's had a tragic life, I really want Joe Biden to do well. And so there was this goodwill that all of these voters seemed to have for Joe Biden, but then they would just shake their head and say, it's over. He's old. He gets flustered on the stage. He loses his place. It was like kind of a dear uncle or a grandfather who is, kind of fading. And I think that's what a lot of the voters here felt, and they felt very badly about Joe Biden not doing very well. And then I asked them, well, then why don't you vote for him? And they're like, his time has passed.
He gave that impression in the debates. Yeah.
It's him. It's not the age. It's not that he's a senior citizen. Were that the case, Bloomberg and Bernie Sanders would not be where they are. It's about Biden, not about anything else. And it's a tragic thing to see somebody who's been around that long go out the door that way. But it's him.
And yet, the exit polls we've seen, both Dave and Hank, the exit polls we've seen, and Dave, I think you got this on your emails, age for 1 out of 23% of the voters in New Hampshire, age is a big factor. And you have Sanders, Biden, and Warren all over the age of 70, deep into the 70, except for Warren. And so age is a factor. I mean, I know you say for Biden it's not because you have Bloomberg's older. So
that's just that. No. It's important what you've said, but I would add the following to it. Bernie Sanders' coalition that keeps voting for him is filled with young people. The people on the streets out there 24 hours a day are not septuagenarians. They're people who are very young, who have a very strong ideological commitment to what their sense of being a Democrat means, and they're intensely engaged. Older voters can't say the same thing. They're not hitting the bricks.
David, I got to say, I'm not sure I have ever seen a situation where you're going to have a guy who is likely to win here in New Hampshire and win Iowa and New Hampshire, and the whole party, not the whole party, but a big chunk of this party is worried about that, and they're taking action over it.
Well, that's the other thing that we heard from so many voters in the last couple of days. I would ask them, do you think that Bernie Sanders can win? Even a lot of Bernie Sanders voters would say, I don't know if he can win in the fall against Donald Trump. There is a lot of concern, not just here in New Hampshire, about a Bernie Sanders campaign in the fall, but also across the country. And the unusual thing about this year is, Iowa and New Hampshire, in the past, the elections were set basically after Iowa and New Hampshire. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. Nevada, South Carolina, then March 3rd. I've talked with a lot of politicians who say this thing could go past the April 28th primary, when Connecticut votes, when New York votes. We could be players in this primary, and usually it's all done by April 28th.
The exit polls we saw, David and Hank, show that the Democratic Party, most of them in New Hampshire, are interested in who can beat Donald Trump. That's item number one.
That is the big thing. If you look at the Bloomberg ads, what do you see? He can beat Trump almost from day one. Accuracy of polling versus inaccuracy. That message is very clear.
Let's, gentlemen, let's get a deeper view and dive deeper a little bit into the Sanders phenomenon with our ABC News embed, who is with the Sanders campaign. Adam Kelsey is also in Manchester. Adam, do you hear me?
Hey, yeah, how are you? Good evening.
Hi, nice to see you again, Adam. So tell me what, you sense this phenomenon that's going on. Sanders is likely to win New Hampshire. He tied for a win in Iowa, and the party is kind of freaking out and figuring out, the moderates are, how are we going to stop this guy? I've never seen that in a presidential election before. What's the mood there for the Sanders camp about that phenomenon?
Yeah, well, there's obviously cautious optimism about how the race has been going so far. And when they look at the rest of the field, the thing that they are most optimistic about is the fact that Senator Sanders has the most passionate support. What we're seeing on the moderate side, the establishment Democrats, if you will, kind of shopping around between Joe Biden, Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg. And what they're saying on the Sanders side is that no matter how much shopping around goes on kind of in the middle of the political spectrum, that Senator Sanders' base, that 15 to 20%, isn't really going anywhere. And the Democratic Party would be remiss if they're trying to, I guess, take the nomination away from Bernie Sanders, because they're going to upset a big chunk of those Democratic voters come November. It's very similar to what we saw back in 2016, where Hillary Clinton had a tough time winning over the far left voters, the ones who were voting for Senator Sanders in the primary. So it remains to be seen if we're going to have a repeat of what we saw 4 years ago. But as far as the Sanders campaign is looking ahead right now, they see a lot of Super Tuesday states where they have a lot of consistent support. They're going to send Bernie Sanders out to North Carolina, to Texas, 2 of those Super Tuesday states in this coming week, and they feel like he's going to keep building his momentum ahead of those that big voting day in early March.
You know, Adam, you said something that, and Hank here was shaking his head. It's the key word is passion. You saw it with Barack Obama. You see it with Donald Trump voters. There is a passion there that perhaps a lot of the other candidates don't really generate, and that's why perhaps giving light to what you're saying and giving credence to it, this thing could go on a long time because those supporters are passionate. They're not going to give up very easily.
Yeah, and so much of what Bernie Sanders says at his rallies, at his events, is that they're building a movement. The slogan of this campaign is "Not Me, Us." He wants to be the organizer-in-chief rather than the commander-in-chief. So when you talk about building a movement, you're talking about speaking to voters who weren't particularly involved in the political process before. So that's young voters, it's voters of color, working-class voters who may have been Republicans or independents and are just coming over to the Democratic Party for the first time. So when you're building that movement and there's that sense of belonging, it's about something bigger than just the individual. It can be tough when later during a general election you're suddenly told to give all of that up and support the Democratic nominee who isn't Bernie Sanders. So again, we're looking a long ways away in the future, but as far as that passion goes that we're talking about, it's not dissipating anytime soon for Bernie Sanders. He's going to be in this primary race for quite a long time.
All right, Hank, a quick question for Adam, and Dave, you can ask a question too later. Go ahead.
Look, simple. Adam's right. Why is the intensity there? Because the Democratic Party is in trouble. The decision has been made whether they're going to be a party, whether they're going to be a social movement, or whether they're going to be like the Republicans by talking a lot. He's the answer and antidote to the problem, which is he intends to make things happen.
I don't know if Dave wants to chime in here at all, Adam, but I will say and ask you, if there are people who are going to leave this race, a Warren, for instance, a Klobuchar, is the Sanders campaign trying to make any headway, or does it believe that it could get some of those votes, especially supporters of Senator Warren?
Well, let me first give you two kind of lesser names that the Sanders campaign has their eye on. One is Andrew Yang, another Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii. Not a big chunk of voters there, maybe 4 or 5% nationally, but a lot of the folks who are supporting Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard were Bernie Sanders supporters back in 2016, who continue to shop around a little bit. They're fans of Gabbard's anti-war stances. They're fans of Andrew Yang's kind of outside-the-box campaign. So those could be supporters that Sanders picks up. And certainly, given some of the conversation that's been had in recent days about all of the money that Elizabeth Warren is burning through, Bernie Sanders continues to be the number one second choice, I should say, for Warren supporters. If she ends up out of this race in the next few weeks, Bernie Sanders certainly the first candidate in this race that stands to benefit.
Adam, we thank you very much for joining us on the countdown. I really appreciate it, and great seeing you again. Good luck tonight.
Absolutely.
All right, you got a lot of coverage to go. Dave Evans, you've been listening to all this. What's your sense about supporters that might be going to Bernie Sanders, and who would he try to woo?
Well, I think the Elizabeth Warren campaign is in trouble. It's not doing nearly as well as they hoped. You have to remember she is from the neighboring state of Massachusetts, and I think that she had her hopes pinned on New Hampshire. But ideologically, she is in the same spectrum, if you will, with Bernie Sanders. So I think that if she were to leave the race, those voters would go to Bernie Sanders. That certainly helps him. Amy Klobuchar, she can hang on for a little bit longer. She said that she has gotten $3 million in donations just since her Friday debate performance. She did very, very well in that debate. I think maybe some people are giving her a second look as moderates kind of, scramble around as to who they're going to support as they see Biden falter. But I think the real person who's going to be benefiting from a lot of this turmoil, this churn within the Democratic Party right now is Mike Bloomberg. Yep. He has, as we know, $60 billion he has spent, I think somewhere north of $300 million already in these states. I think after March 3rd, this race is perhaps going to look very, very different. I've talked with some people here who I don't know if this is possible or not, but they've talked about the possibility of a brokered convention. I don't think we say brokered anymore. I guess we say contested convention, that no one would have a majority to go ahead and win at the national convention in Milwaukee later this summer, and that it would come down to something like a Biden, a Sanders, and a Bloomberg, and there would be some brokering or contesting to see who would actually be the nominee.
Let me talk to both of you about the item that was made news today involving former Mayor Bloomberg, and that is his explanation for stop and frisk. He's apologized for it. It went bonkers in terms of the quantity of stop and frisks incidents here in New York. Most of the people who were stopped were young people, young men of color. And today it came out that, and I know you both saw the news, it came out that a video was made at the Aspen Institute in 2015. It was not released back then, saying that, with some very serious phrases that Mr. Bloomberg used about especially young black men getting stopped for stop and frisk, and how they were the predominant perpetrators for crime in New York City. And President Trump even tweeted out about it and raised the level sky high by that. Mr. Trump, who is a backer and supporter of stop and frisk, and he took down that tweet. I think we have some of that for you, what he had on there. This has been a big issue. Can he overcome that? Let's start with Hank.
Anything is overcomable if you have enough firepower and people believe you. If the choice is chaos or electing a Democrat to beat Donald Trump, and Mike Bloomberg's the last one standing and the one who seems to do it, they'll vote for him. Problem, who's they? Whoever the Democratic electorate is. Can Trump use it in the fall? The answer is no. So it's a good argument in a primary, but not in a general election. Who's the person that can beat Trump? That's the only thing that matters to Democrats ultimately.
Dave, that question included in my question to you, that answer by Hank, is that enough to get African American voters, especially who Mr. Biden is going to try to show he's got that ace up his sleeve in the South Carolina primary in a couple of weeks? Is that enough for Mr. Bloomberg to win over African American voters?
Well, I think we will see, but when you and Hank were talking, the thing that I was struck by is what we're seeing right now is all of these commercials with Barack Obama sitting and talking and discussing policy with Mike Bloomberg. So he is doing exactly right. And money talks in these campaigns. And these ads that he is running, showing him working with President Obama, I think those are very effective. He's doing all the right things by getting African-American elected mayors and other officials to support his campaign. He is reaching out to the black community. I think today may be a ripple. There may be a few days of news about that. But I think that all of these millions and millions of dollars of ads, I think that is going to paper over the trouble, I think.
Does money trump? Hank?
Listen, who's the one that can beat Trump, money or otherwise, is the only question. Bernie Sanders is going to make the case that he can because he's more like the party. Populism is not new to this country, nor to either side of the aisle. He'll make that case. Mike Bloomberg will. This will, as Dave said, pass very quickly, likely. Some will raise it. The Sanders people will raise it behind the scenes and put it up online to make sure everybody sees it. Is that going to turn the tables?
Will it?
The only guy that's hurting from it all is Joe Biden. Because when Barack Obama sat next to Michael Bloomberg in that ad, Joe Biden must have felt like the entire floor came out from him. And that was what we used to call a big kick in the head.
So one of the things that Mr. Bloomberg, and as we wrap this up, will be going after to make history, will be that, in the course of history, only 3 presidents have gotten the presidency and not won Iowa and New Hampshire. And that would be Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and George W. Bush. The last 3 out of 4 presidents. Trump won those. So he's bucking history here, Hank.
It also tells you the nature of where we are. We are bucking history in this entire moment. Remember, 6 months ago, there was a guy whose name we couldn't pronounce from a lightly populated state and the mayor of a city that few people go to unless they're involved with Notre Dame.
100,000 people live there.
That's right. He's in the hunt. Yep. Think about this. Pretty extraordinary. Anything can happen.
Dave, predictions for tonight?
Oh, I think Bernie Sanders wins tonight. I think Pete Buttigieg will probably come in a close second. We kind of gambled here coming to this location. I mean, Buttigieg could surprise us and possibly win tonight, but I think Sanders is going to pull out the win. This race, I think, is going to go for a while, and I think that since 2016, since we saw the election of Donald Trump, all those historical things that we use to make predictions about politics going forward, they changed in 2016. They are very different than they were in the past. I don't think that you can look and say who wins Iowa, New Hampshire, they're going to be our nominee. Everything is different. Thank you, Donald Trump.
There you go. Let me say one more thing about Michael Bloomberg. He is taking out a lot of ads here in New York, and it's serving to compare for you New Yorkers his mayoralship over 12 years with Bill de Blasio's mayorship in the last 7 years. And that is effective, I think, and effective advertising as well. That's going to do it for us. I want to thank my guests, Hank Scheinkoff here in New York, Dave Evans in Manchester, ABC News Embed with the Sanders campaign, Adam Kelsey, also in New Hampshire. It's going to be quite a night. We're going to have it all for you throughout the night. Online, we'll be keeping track of what's happening in New Hampshire and the vote. And of course, make sure you tune in tonight to Eyewitness News at 11 for the latest on the primary results and another live report from our political reporter, Dave Evans from New Hampshire. Another edition of The Countdown is now being put to bed. And we thank you for watching on abc7ny.com and all of its cyberspace platforms. We really do thank you. Thank you for watching. We'll be keeping tabs online all night and, of course, again on Eyewitness News at 11 o'clock. Good night, and we'll see you at 11 o'clock.